You don't have to be a lawyer. You're the one who said what should be investigated.
Why don't we investigate many people in this committee, Senator? Many people.
You just heard Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent get asked about President Trump's stock trading. And instead of answering, he snaps back with, why don't we investigate many people in this committee? That right there is the move. Dodge the question, smear everybody, protect the top. Because this hearing gets messier fast. Elizabeth Warren keeps pressing one basic standard. Do the rules apply to the president too? And Bessent just keeps trying to reroute the whole thing into Congress first, like that magically makes the White House immune. Hey y'all, welcome in. How are you doing today? This is Saha Explains. Hit like, drop your take in the comments, and subscribe before we get into the part where the evasions get blatant.
Last year, you came out in support of a trading ban for members of Congress, and I have introduced legislation to do exactly that. You explained the need for a ban on our trading stock by saying, quote, you look at some of these eye-popping returns, every hedge fund would be jealous of them. And that, quote, if any private citizen traded that way, the SEC would be knocking on their door. Those are strong words from someone who used to run a hedge fund. Last month, President Trump's latest financial disclosures came out, and they show that he made more than 3,400 stock trades worth more than $250 million in just the first 3 months of 2026. That's roughly half of what all 535 members of Congress made last year combined. And the value of virtually every one of those stocks that the president traded in is directly affected by President Trump's official actions. So, Secretary Bessent, you and I agree that it is a conflict of interest for members of Congress to trade stocks. Do you also agree that it's a conflict of interest for President Trump to trade stocks?
Notice what Warren's doing. She's not asking for vibes. She's taking the exact principle Bessent already endorsed, conflicts of interest, the SEC, eye-popping returns, and she's applying it to the most powerful person in the country. And watch how fast that principle suddenly needs an escape hatch.
Well, a couple of things, Senator. One, President Trump is not sitting in the Oval Office engaging in a high-frequency trading strategy. Clearly, he had an outside manager who was doing that, and I think it's incumbent upon both houses of Congress to get their house in order before you move to the administrative branch.
There it is. He had an outside manager is not an answer to, is it a conflict? And Congress first is the oldest trick in Washington. Set a precondition so the question never gets asked upstairs. Accountability, but only for the people with less power. That's not ethics. That's a shield.
You think it's okay for the president to do this? Because let's be clear, you are a Wall Street guy, so you know better. The investments that President Trump has made are not blind. President Trump literally signed the 113-page document publicly listing all of his individual stock trades at the same time that he is making decisions affecting those stocks. So you're going to sit here with straight face and say it's not a conflict of interest for the President of the United States to do that?
I'm going to say this body needs to get its house in order first.
How about we get the White House in order at the same time?
I would encourage you to do that.
Warren is basically saying, stop hiding behind process. Answer the conflict question. And Bessent's response is, this body, over and over. That's not oversight. That's running out the clock. Now, wait, because Warren doesn't just argue in generalities. She goes straight to specific trades.
Senator?
Let's look at some individual trades. On January 6th, Donald Trump purchased up to $1 million worth of NVIDIA stock. 1 week later, his administration changed U.S. policy and loosened the rules on export controls so that NVIDIA could sell its chips to China. Now the price of NVIDIA stock is through the roof. So, Secretary Bessent, you said last year, if any private citizen traded the way members of Congress do, quote, the SEC would be knocking on their door. So my question is, should the SEC be knocking on President Trump's door to start an investigation over this trade?
Again, if this body wants to ban individual stock trading, which I would advocate for yourself, start there. And if you want legislative action to continue, that's your prerogative.
Listen to what just happened. Warren asks a clean question about standards and investigation. Bessent doesn't say yes, doesn't say no. He says, start there, your prerogative. Translation, I'm not touching the Trump question. And to be clear, raising a timeline and asking for an investigation is not a conviction. That's literally how accountability is supposed to work. You don't get to be president and also be exempt from scrutiny because your cabinet secretary keeps pointing at Congress like it's a magic mirror.
So it's our prerogative. So you would support our saying that President Trump should be investigated over this?
I would support
our trade should be investigated and President Trump should be investigated.
I would support you getting your house in order, Senator.
And how about the White House getting its house in order? Would you support that investigation?
Please lead by example.
I would like to see the President of the United States lead by example. You say there should be an investigation when that kind of activity takes place. How about we start with the White House?
This is the whole game in one clip. Warren says, okay, investigate. Bessent says, fix Congress first. Warren says, cool, what about the White House? Bessent says, lead by example. That's not an answer. That's a sermon designed to dodge oversight. And create a statute is another deflection. Because we're not talking about inventing brand new morality. We're talking about whether the people in charge will even acknowledge the conflict problem when it points at Trump. Now watch the next pivot, because Warren switches angles. Not did it happen, but if inside information was used, is that illegal? That's a straight question.
President Trump bought tens of thousands of dollars worth of stock in Robinhood and the Bank of New York Mellon Corporation, known as BNY. On April 6th, your Treasury Department announced it had chosen the financial agent to implement the new Trump accounts program, BNY and its partner, Robinhood. Both stocks, of course, have risen since then. So, Secretary Bessent, let me ask you a different question. If these stock purchases that Trump made were made using inside information, would that be illegal?
Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to speak to that. And I think,
would it be worth investigating? You don't have to be a lawyer.
Why don't we investigate many people in this committee, Senator? Many people.
And you don't think the White House should have to follow the same set of rules that are already the law?
I think you should get your house in order here.
My house is in order. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
And you should have your fellow committee members, mostly on your side of the aisle.
This is where Bessent completely gives the game away. You're the Treasury Secretary. You're sitting in front of a United States Senator. You're being asked whether using inside information would be illegal, and the response is, I'm not a lawyer. Then immediately, why don't we investigate many people in this committee? That's not governance. That's threat posturing. That's, if you come at the president, I'll spray suspicion at everyone else. It's a fog machine. And it's meant to make you, regular people watching, throw up your hands and go, well, everybody's corrupt, so who cares? That's how accountability dies. And Warren's closing line matters. Stronger anti-corruption and conflict of interest rules for everyone. Everyone. Congress and the president. That's pro-democracy. That's literally how you keep public service from becoming a personal ATM. So no, this wasn't just Elizabeth Warren arguing with Scott Bessent. This was Warren forcing the real question into the open. When the conflict of interest spotlight hits President Trump, why does the Treasury Secretary's answer turn into investigate the committee and get your house in order? The next time you hear someone yell hypocrisy to shut down oversight, remember what you just watched. It's not a standard. It's an escape route. Drop your take below, hit like, subscribe to Saha Explains, and stick around, because if we don't demand one rule book, we're signing up for permanent immunity at the top.